Okay, so post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's also called, is an anxiety disorder caused by very stressful, frightening or distressing events. Someone with PTSD often relives the traumatic events through nightmares and flashbacks and may experience feelings of isolation, irritability and guilt. They may also have problems sleeping, such as insomnia, and find concentrating difficult. These symptoms are often severe and persistent enough to have a significant impact on the person's day-to-day life. I've started this by quoting from the NHS directly because I'm not a qualified mental health advisor, or as far as my qualifications to talk about this sort of thing go, well, I have a social sciences degree. I was a mentor for children with mental health issues, and I've suffered with PTSD myself. However, I'm not a qualified mental health doctor. I just thought I'd make that nice and clear. I more want to talk about my experiences of PTSD because I just want to let other people out there know that you're not alone. Now, there's certain things that will run through people's heads when they hear PTSD, one of them being soldiers. And military combat can be a reason for PTSD, but there can be lots of others. Serious road accidents, violent personal assaults, be them sexual assaults, muggings or robberies, prolonged abuse or neglect, the witnessing of violent deaths, hostage situations, terrorist attacks, natural disasters, a whole shebang. And something I actually felt when I developed PTSD originally was, and I know a lot of people probably feel this, you feel that you're not one of the worser people, so you don't, in a way, you're not worthy of help. I was in a robbery hostage situation where I was assaulted, and in a way I downplayed it. I kept thinking that there's people who have been raped and there are people who have been in wars and they're far more deserving of help than me. And this was a barrier to actually getting help. There was plenty of other barriers. One of them being that I didn't realise what I had at first. I simply thought I was going crazy. It's complicated and it's different for everybody. But you need to know, A, that you're not the only one out there, but B, that everybody deserves help, and nobody's wrong for how they got it or of lesser deserving of help. If you have a problem, you're fully deserving of the help. There is also a lot of guilt associated with PTSD, and I did personally feel guilt. I felt guilt that the situation happened around me without me doing much about it. Basically, one day I was at work and I'd been trying to get promoted. I was also at uni at the same time, and I knew that I didn't have long left at uni. And I was determined that I didn't want to get a degree and then that kickstart my career. I wanted to work my way up the ranks while I was doing uni, so I could show I'd made it without uni and then go on from there. I'd managed to become a supervisor, but I wanted to be a manager, and one of the things you had to do where I work was work in the kitchen if you wanted to progress. I hated the kitchen. I found it tough, demanding work, and hats off to anyone who does that kind of work on a regular basis, because it wasn't for me. I was up in the kitchen one night and I'd cooked all day and I'd managed it quite well, especially considering my hatred for that particular environment. I'd cleaned everything up. I went through the whole shutdown process, making sure everything was turned off and checked and double checked, took the fridge and freezer temperatures. Everything was perfect. It was all safe. I was exhausted, but I was happy with myself. I was satisfied. I got the rubbish in bags and walked it out to throw it in the trash. I could have left there and there, having finished my job, but I decided that to be nice, I'd go through to the bar area and I'd help everyone there close down. I had this idea that we were all in it together and that the job could be horrible, but it was this teamwork and all of us against the world that, leaning on each other's support, that, it held us all together. It made it a worthwhile environment. So I walked through from the back of house to the front of house, and there was a sudden flash of pain. I'd been hit across the side of my head with a crowbar. I felt the pain explode through my head and my vision blurred for a second, and then this buzzing noise came from somewhere deep inside my head. I started to gain awareness of my surroundings again, and I could see I was surrounded by 5 or 6 guys. All of them were wearing Halloween-style president masks, and before I could do anything else I was hit with crowbars again and again from various directions. In the end, it took about 6 hits to my head. I never passed out, but things got really hazy. Somehow I made it from there to the bar, and I kind of crawled along behind the bar and dropped down under the coffee machine. I could feel blood dripping from my head, but luckily I'd been wearing a leather cap to keep my hair covered in the kitchen, and it seemed to have at least cushioned things a bit and held things together. There were 2 girls behind the bar. One was about 2 years older than me, and the other was maybe 5. It had become a robbery hostage situation, and in the middle of this, one of the robbers decided he wanted to rape one of the girls, and I stood in the way and pretty much suggested that it would happen over my dead body. This resulted in me getting a punch in the mouth, which cracked one of my wisdom teeth in half. It was all a blur from then on, but they didn't go through with that, so I at least, that was a positive for me. They left with the money and they were never caught. But after I'd been punched in the face, I basically collapsed in the corner under the coffee machine, and I was in the sitting position, holding on to the walls because everything in the room felt like it was spinning. I could feel that my body wanted to pass out, but, I'd always been told you pass out, you die sort of thing. I know that's not medically accurate, but these things run through your head. And I just kept thinking that I didn't want to die because I wanted to see my daughter grow up. And I looked to the people beside me. One of the 2 girls, the one furthest away from me, was crying and going on about how we were all going to die, and she didn't help matters. That made it probably more traumatic, although I can understand the way she felt. The other girl had gone to school with me, though, and was a few years above me. And I remember her asking me if I was alright, and she actually seemed to be more concerned about me than herself, and, that's something I'll never forget. I remember telling her I was okay and not to worry about it, but it was a lie. I didn't have a clue how I was. I just appreciated the fact she'd reached out to me like that, and I didn't want her to get upset. I wanted her to stay calm and stay safe. When the robbers had left and before the police arrived, I remember pulling myself up the floor and walking across to where they kept the cutlery, and I sat down and began to polish and wrap the cutlery because this is something we did at the end of every shift before going home. I never thought about calling an ambulance or about treating it as a big deal, but when the police arrived, they must have called the ambulance, and that came and fetched me. And I remember arriving at hospital and sitting in the emergency room. I looked around the room, seeing a lot of the people there, and I looked to the telephone. It was late at night, and at the time I was living with my partner and child at my parents' house, and I knew that if my mum woke up at any point and found out I hadn't got home, she'd panic. So I decided I need to call home. I need to let them know what had happened, but try to make it sound like not a big deal. I mean, this was a big issue for me, because how do you phone somebody after this? And, how do you say, hey, I just got beaten in the head, I'm in hospital, I'm going to be late home? Don't worry about it. You don't really. I called, and thankfully I got my dad, because the guy's as solid as a rock. If I'd got my mum, she'd have been in screaming hysterics, but bless her, I love her. Unfortunately, she's passed away now, but she was such a loving mum that it would have been very hard for her. Whereas my dad cares a lot, but he's got a very good game face, and when things go wrong, he can sort a situation out and then worry about it later. But I told him, not to worry, not to come. But bless him, he shot down and he was with me in no time at all. When I got seen, it turned out that all I had was surface wounds on my head. I didn't need any stitches, and I got given a pamphlet of concussion and told that I was allowed to go home as long as there'd be people there to watch out for me. Apparently 2 things really had saved my bacon, and one was wearing a leather baseball cap, and the other was that apparently I've got a super tough, thick skull, a bit Neanderthal manish, and you know, if I'd got a softer skull, it might have cracked. Even then, I felt a lot of guilt straight away. You know, I let them hit me. The problem was the first hit I was disorientated, and then I was hit again before I could do anything. But I still suffered tremendous guilt that at some point I should have hit back, I should have clawed back. It really hit my masculinity. I'd been in fights my whole life. I'd had a knife drawn on me when I was 16 by 2 lads older than me, and I'd fought back and knocked it out their hands. I'd been attacked in a bus station by a lad much older than me, and I'd hit him back and fought back and managed to get away. Heck, when I was 8, I got beaten black and blue by a kid who was years older than me, that was in the foster system, who was just an animal that went around beating younger kids. Obviously now I understand some of how he was probably feeling, and it was probably aggression from elsewhere, but all these things I'd fought back, and I didn't fight back with the robbery really. Yeah, when they said they were going to do the particular thing to the girl, I told them over my dead body and stood up, but then they just punched me and I didn't do anything back. And a lot of it was the rationalisation that if I fought back, it wasn't just myself that could get in trouble. There was a whole bunch of other people there, the 2 girls behind the bar, a manager. They might not have stopped with me. If they'd have hit me, they might have hit them after. And, you really don't want to turn something like that into more. At the end of the day, it's just money. And sod that company, because they later sacked me for being off with PTSD. But it's not worth being a hero for their profits. But yeah, I still suffer with a lot of guilt over it. At the time, I was off for a month getting limited sick pay, and I spent most of my time playing on retro consoles, and it really got me into the hobby. But at the time, my partner I was with didn't seem to care what had happened to me. It was no help at all. But my mum and dad were seriously helping me. It was hard to leave the house, and it was hard to get on with things. But the real problems started a good 6 years later or so. And it was strange because I was having bad dreams about what had happened, but I was also having sort of audio hallucinations. I could hear things like the buzz in my head that had happened while I was disorientated, and I started to think about it a lot more, and it wouldn't leave me alone. I had some pretty violent, horrible nightmares where the robbery kind of semi-happened or started to happen, and then I would get one of the robbers and I would trap him under one of those rolling metal doors, and I'd start stabbing him in the face with a kitchen knife. I was really worried that I'd lost myself. I mean, I don't know if I'd have ever found one of them. I don't know if I would have been capable of that, or whether it was just my mind blowing off steam. But I'd just got all this pressure. I'd got the pressure of an awful marriage with somebody that just wasn't supportive. I don't know how it got to that stage. I'd got a job where I was working like 70 hours a week, and I was going up the ranks. I was a deputy manager, and I was trying to make a name for myself and a future for me and my child, and all the pressure just started to make things get worse, and I just couldn't bear it anymore. I was having these thoughts, and they weren't suicidal thoughts, but they were self-harm related thoughts. I thought that if I jumped down the stairs leg first, I could shatter one of my legs, be unable to walk, and then I wouldn't have to go to work. I didn't want to leave the house. Whenever I was in work for more than a minute amount of time, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. It was almost sort of claustrophobia, but despite the fact it was in a massive place, it just literally felt like everything was getting smaller and smaller, and that didn't happen at home. I could sit and play a game or watch a film and feel like I'd got all the space in the world. And I went to a doctor's appointment, got put on sick, got crisis team in touch with me, and I got sent to different therapists until eventually they put me with a trauma therapist. The thing is, I had a lot of problems with pushing myself further and further along in a job and not listening to my mental health. It was a sort of cultural thing. I'd been brought up in a world where it's thought of that a man provides for his children, that he pays his mortgage, and that if he can't do these things, then he isn't a man. When I went to the doctors, I didn't intend to stop working. I went for help to cope. I didn't know what I wanted. I just didn't want to give in, and I didn't want to be suffering what I was. So when I got put with this special trauma therapist, part of my therapy involved having to talk about what had happened to me in great detail. And I found out there was bits I'd not remembered right, and it kind of escaped from me piece by piece. And as it did, it actually helped a bit. But there was this thing where in order to calm yourself, you have to have a happy place. And it's a place in your mind where you feel safe and happy. And my happy place was in my bedroom playing Super Mario World. Jumping on dinosaurs, collecting power-ups, finding hidden secrets. And, it really helped keep me together. And I had to find sort of coping mechanisms. I didn't want to leave the house, but one of the things that would get me out of the house was visiting markets or retro stores, taking little bits of money to look for old games. I got this thrill of the chase where if I could find an old game for very little that was worth more, it made me feel better. In a way, this led to some issues of its own because my friends stopped paying attention to me or seeing me, and games became my real friends. I'm telling this story though because I want people to kind of know what it feels like. I think from my perspective it did feel like sudden insanity or creeping insanity. I wasn't aware that things like this really existed. Yeah, sure, I knew people had mental health problems, but I didn't realise that events in your life could affect you later on. If there's anybody here that hears this and this rings a bell for them, it's not a competition. There's always going to be somebody that's had worse things happen to them, but that doesn't mean that you can't seek out help. And if you're feeling guilt, I think a lot of people feel that, but you don't want that to be an obstacle to you getting better. A lot of the time in life, people feel guilty with no real reason. You know, I can say I feel guilty that I didn't start kung fu flipping and punching crowbars out of people's hands. But how many people in real life really would have done that? And how do you know that would have ended up well? They might have just beat me to the ground and beat everyone else to death after. All you can do is try to come to peace with what you did. I guess the other thing is to say I had therapy for a year and it didn't really end it. I still have moments now and then when it all feels too much, when I feel overwhelmed and I fear I could slip into being as bad as I was before. I do have some depression now again, anxiety, the odd panic attack, but it's ultimately a lot better than I was. I do all kinds of things like make myself little deals that if I can do this, I can buy this, or if I can put up with this stress or hold this at bay, then I can let myself do this. But in general, it's a good thing. I'm more aware that my mental health is something that you have to work on, much like you do your physical health. You're not just sick or well. There's a scale, and if you feel yourself tipping, then you can do things to help yourself. You can ask for help. You can inform yourself. I mean, obviously, I'm not telling people to go look online and diagnose themselves, but you can read and see if there's things you relate to, and then go and look at talking to somebody. I guess the whole reason I'm doing this is because if something like this had existed that I had found when I was suffering, I might have felt a little bit more normal. And if you're suffering with symptoms of PTSD, it doesn't mean you're not normal. It just means you're going through something. You can get help. You can come to terms with what you've gone through. Peace and love to everyone out there who's suffering. I hope it gets better soon. I hope you get the help you need, and that you can go on, die on this and have a good life. Thank you very much for listening.